Grace and peace, Apostle Cheryl Richardson here. It's important that we develop an understanding of what domestic violence is and just how traumatic it is. It's important that we understand that domestic violence doesn't begin when there is physical aggression, that there are many, many more components to domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And so it is our mandate to educate and to raise awareness and to empower so that we can get ahead of this thing because it is destroying lives, and not a day goes by that we don't hear another report of someone who's been, savagely mistreated or psychologically abused, even murdered. You have entire families being murdered, and then the abuser committing suicide or not, in a culmination of intimate partner violence that's been ongoing. And oftentimes, family members and friends are unaware. And so, if you joined us on the day, we thank you. We appreciate your support and your prayers. And just know that this is something that we have been directed to do by the Lord, and we're more than happy to do it. We know and we believe that the plan that the Lord has for our lives individually is an amazing plan, and it does not include being mistreated and called out of your name and being physically aggressed against, etc., etc. We've done about 40 of these to date, and you can Google, check this page, my personal page, the ministry page, Lion of Judah Global Impact Ministries, or Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. We post these on all of our pages. We share on Twitter, we share on Instagram. Feel free to inbox me if you have any questions, as many of you do. And if you were someone is a survivor and you are feeling ready to share your story, whatever parts of your story you feel comfortable sharing, then reach out and let me know. And we'll make arrangements to secure a date to give you an opportunity to share your story, which could very well help promote your own healing and encourage someone else who is right now dealing with domestic violence. Okay, so if you would tag and share, I would appreciate it. I'm tagging as many of you as I can. And then we're going to get back to our topic from the perspective of a survivor, because the survivor's perspective is different than anyone else's perspective. And it's important to know that every single survivor is not going to have the same perspective, okay? And so you want to be mindful of that as well. And as you've heard me say previously, women are not the only victims of intimate partner violence. Men are victims too. Men are victimized as well. And not only in same-sex relationships, but in heterosexual relationships where the female partner is the abuser, okay? So it is reported more often than not that the woman is the victim. And typically when you have physical aggression, the male is the aggressor. But even then, there are many, many times when the female partner is the aggressor. And then there are those times when it's resistive or reactive aggression, which means that the victim is responding in an attempt to resist further abuse, and that is the reason for their behavior. So this is what I tell people who find themselves in a relationship that is toxic. It's if this relationship is drawing out of you behaviors that you don't even approve of, behaviors that kind of undermine your own character, that violate your own core values, then it's a unhealthy relationship, and it's one that you need to exit. Okay, so it's not even necessary. Hey Joseph, hey Latanya, it's not necessary to point fingers or blame. If you find yourself no longer being yourself, if you find yourself behaving as someone that you're ashamed of, you're engaging in behaviors that you wouldn't want loved ones or your employer or your pastor or your bishop or your neighbor to observe you displaying, that's a problem. And it's a tremendous red flag, okay? So again, we're going to be talking about domestic violence from the perspective of the survivor, okay? Now, we've talked about this before, and I told you on last week that domestic violence in all of its form is traumatic and it's ongoing, right? It's not a discrete incident. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that's ongoing. And what we tend to gravitate to when we talk about intimate partner violence is we focus on the physical aggression. And when we do that, we are failing to recognize that the verbal abuse, the threats, the intimidation, the stalking, the financial abuse, the coercive control, all of these are abusive behaviors, and all of them inflict trauma. But we are conditioned to recognize only the physical aggression. And even then, it almost has to be serious physical aggression to be recognized as something to be concerned about. A push or a shove is not necessarily recognized as physical aggression, when in fact it is. Okay, so domestic violence in all of its forms is an ongoing traumatic experience. And so when you're talking about the survivor, and when you're talking about how they navigate life, how they flow through life, how they live their life day to day, it's through this lens of trauma that they are trying to function, okay? Okay, Latanya, I understand. So, the hallmark of a toxic relationship or domestic violence riddled relationship is that it's overwhelming, right? It's overwhelming mentally, it's overwhelming physically, emotionally, and oftentimes financially. So, a basic underpinning of intimate partner violence riddled relationship is that it feels it's overwhelming in all of these different dimensions that we've just mentioned, okay? So, what is a victim confronted with? The first thing that they have to be able to do, and we talked about this on last week, but the first thing that they have to be able to do is to acknowledge within themselves that they have found themselves in this situation in which, hey Ray, in which the bottom feels like it's falling out. And it's embarrassing, and it's hurtful. And as we've said before, anyone can be a victim, right? And anyone can be an abuser. So the fact that maybe the victim is educated, maybe they are a professional, maybe they are wealthy, maybe they have great status in the community, doesn't make any difference. It has not protected them from finding themselves in a toxic relationship that has turned into a situation in which intimate partner violence is practiced, okay? And so the more a person has attained, or the more highly they're thought of by their peers, the more highly they're thought of by their family members, by their neighbors, by the public, the more difficult it is for them to acknowledge that they are in fact entrenched in a domestic violence situation. And so the challenge for them is to accept themselves that this in fact has occurred. But that's just step one. And so then step two would be doing something about it. Acknowledging that, okay, this is my reality. I don't believe this is what my reality is supposed to be. And I need to get out of here, okay? So the first thing is recognizing, accepting it internally. And that can take a while. Because you're talking about everything that they've believed up until that point in their life to be true about who they are and their value and their self-worth and their accomplishments and all of that has just been dashed to the ground, right? Nothing is lining up the way it's supposed to if they are as competent and smart and capable as they have been told that they are, as is reinforced for them when they're interacting with their neighbors, when they're at work or whatever. They're held in high esteem. People, admire them and think they're amazing or smart or whatever. But then they go home, they go back to this relationship, and it's the complete opposite. So finding, striking a balance, being able to accept, hey Philly, being able to accept that this is what my life has turned into. is a hard step. And for many, it takes a long time. And for many, it takes years. And the problem becomes that over time, their sense of self and who they are and their how capable they are and how smart they are or whatever their strengths have been becomes eroded over time. So now they no longer know who they are. And that makes it increasingly difficult to get out, okay? So, hey there. So it's important to, if you're going to be dealing with victims, and even if you're a victim yourself, if you're a survivor, no matter how long ago it's been, it's important to understand that there's this lens that you now view things through that may not be quite accurate. And it's not a situation that you can escape successfully all by yourself. You need support, you need help, because over time, the trauma has rewired your brain, which means it impacts the way you view everything. It impacts your ability to make sound decisions. It impacts your ability to differentiate between past and present. It impacts your ability to ascertain if you're safe or not safe. Hey, Dexter. And so all these things impact all of your other relationships, all right? Okay, so far we've talked about the fact that domestic violence is traumatic throughout, not only when it results in physical aggression. Physical aggression may happen every blue moon. It may happen every day. It may happen every other hour. The frequency really depends on the dynamics of the relationship, the mindset of the abuser, how prone they are to using physical aggression to retain control over the victim. Okay, because when you're talking about domestic violence, you're talking about power and control. It's got nothing at all to do with love. Love has nothing to do with it. Okay, now, so once the victim can accept, whether they're male or female, once they can accept within themselves that they are in fact being mistreated, they've got to kind of overcome the embarrassment that goes along with that, right? And then they have to arrive at a decision that they don't deserve to be treated this way. Because it's not until you come to the decision that this is not what I deserve in my life that you begin to think about exiting. If you think you deserve it, there's no need to exit, right? If you think you deserve it, then the abuser is right. The abuser is right, and you're wrong, and you stay. But once you accept that this is too much, this is not what my life is supposed to look like. Yes, it's embarrassing, but I'm past that, and I got to get out of here. Now you've got to think about, what is my exit going to look like? And what might my exit cost me, okay? What might my exit cost me? Because 30 to 90 days post-exit is an increasingly dangerous time for a victim who has exited a domestic violence situation. That window is very, very intense. And there's a real good chance if something's going to happen, it's going to happen during that time frame. Okay. So, we've talked about the embarrassment. We've talked about arriving at a decision that I really don't deserve this. You know, maybe I'm not perfect, but I don't deserve this, and I need to leave. Then they have to actually formulate a plan. And this is where a survivor really needs help. They need help because there's information that they have, right? They know the abuser. They know their tendencies. They know the cycle of abuse. They know how to read the moods of the abuser most times. There are times when you have survivors telling you that it's unpredictable. But many will tell you that they can kind of predict the mood, the cycle, the tempo, all right? So their anxiety is increasing, but they have to formulate a plan. And so this is why we tell victims that it's important that you be connected to an advocate. This is someone who is skilled in domestic violence, intimate partner violence, advocacy, who can bring things to your attention that maybe you're not considering. They can let you know where the blind spots are in your plan. They can make sure that you understand that you not only need a plan for when you're at home, You need a plan for getting from home to work. You need a plan for getting from work back home safely. You need a plan for if you're in the grocery store and the abuser approaches you. And so these are things that the average person's not going to be able to think about on their own, okay? Hey, believer. There's psychological trauma that we've talked about that, again, is ongoing. And it's generally expressed, the survivor will feel increased fear. So there's this intense anxiety, this intense fear, which makes it difficult to process things, right? To comprehend things and to think things through and to plan rationally. And this is why support is needed. It's imperative that a victim who is trying to exit has support. It's imperative, all right? There's this feeling of loss of control. They are fearful of being killed, often because the abuser has told them that they will kill them. Or they have issued veiled threats. They haven't said it, but they've inferred it. They have implied it, okay? And so these are things that you want to be aware of. And, you know, we're talking about these things so that we can be more sensitive when we are dealing with someone who's in a domestic violence situation. It's so much more complicated than we'll just leave. Well, I wouldn't let them treat me that way. Just leave. And so when we don't understand, when we're not educated, then we're not empathic. And we may actually be contributing to them staying in a horrible situation because they feel as though they have no support. And domestic violence in and of itself, by its nature, is isolating. It's incredibly isolating. It's isolating because the abuser ensures that the victim is isolated, and it's very insidious. It's isolating because the victim is embarrassed, and it's not something that you really just want to talk about at lunch, at work, you know, or after the benediction at church. It's not something that you want to share with people. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. And over time, you're not even sure if what the abuser is saying to you is accurate or not. You know, you start to believe what they're saying to you about you, okay? So, when we talk about trauma, and we spoke about this in a previous discussion, when you talk about trauma, it's important that we not determine the extent of a victim's trauma based on what we feel is traumatic, okay? What am I saying? Something that may be incredibly traumatic to me may not bother you at all, and vice versa. Something that you find traumatic may not bother me at all. May not bother me, literally at all. I may not have to like recenter myself or go into prayer or nothing. It just might be of no consequence to me, but horribly traumatic to the next person. And so it's important that we don't set ourselves up, and even people who haven't experienced with domestic violence, to not set your experience as the litmus test for if someone else should be experiencing trauma or not. Okay? Is that clear? Each person's experience is their own. It's their own experience, okay? And this is true whether the victim is a man or if the victim is a woman, okay? Because, as I said before, men are victims as well. No two survivors are going to respond the exact same way to trauma. And then traumatic reactions are not indicators of mental illness. And we mentioned this before. What happens a lot of times is that the behaviors, the symptoms that have to be pregnant in order to garner a specific mental health diagnosis are some of the same things that are actually trauma reactions. So they're not an indicator of mental illness. They're an indicator that this person has experienced trauma. Okay? And so people make assumptions a lot of times, and they assign mental health diagnoses when in fact it's a trauma reaction. All right? So you want to be able to provide support to a victim that is actually support. When it is actually support, you're not trying to make them do what you want them to do. And it's really easy, it's really easy to get into a situation where, you know, you care about this person, they're being mistreated, They're afraid. They are, they're scared. They're anxious. They're nervous. And it's clear to you that what they need to do is leave that joker. It's clear, right? It's clear to you what needs to happen. It's clear to you who the abuser is. But you're thinking clearly, and you're outside of the situation. And you're not dealing with the emotional, the manipulation, the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the coercive control. You're not dealing with the threats, the blatant threats, the veiled threats. You're not dealing with it that way. And so if you're going to be a benefit, a help, and a support, then you've got to be able to pace yourself along with the victim and understand that ultimately it's their responsibility to make a decision to stay or to go. The other thing you need to know is that on average, when we're talking about women, on average, it takes, love you too, Rosalind, on average, a woman will leave 7 times before she leaves for good, okay? That's on average. That means that there are times when it's below 7. There are times when it's more than 7 times. The problem with this is there's no guarantee that she's going to live to come and go 7 times. And every time she leaves and returns, right, the intensity of the situation increases. The abuser's determination that he's not going to lose control increases. And now he knows, hey B, now he knows that you're capable of considering leaving. And he's looking for signals now that you're leaving. All right? The other thing that you need to know if you're considering helping someone who is a victim is that 20% of domestic violence homicides, right? And I'm not saying this to discourage you from helping anybody, because I want us all to be a resource for people who find themselves in a situation. But you want to count the cost, and you want to know what you're getting yourself into. 20% of domestic violence homicides are not even the victim themselves. 20% of domestic violence homicides are family members, friends, neighbors, innocent bystanders, first responders. Okay? Hey, Dana. Hey, Lori. So this is what we need to know. So I'm not suggesting that you just rush in blindly. I'm wanting you to think about how you can best help someone that's in a situation like this. Maybe your ability to help them is knowing who to refer them to, knowing how to get them a template for a safety plan, knowing the number to the domestic violence hotline, telling them to read our blog at judasroar.com, telling them to reach out to another group here on Facebook. We have a closed, faith-based, private group called Dominion Over Domestic Violence. Okay, so there is help out here, and this is what we want you to know, that there's help out here. It's not like it was 20 years ago when there was no help. It's not like it was 20 years ago when all you would get would be, well, tell him to walk around the block and take a deep breath, or smoke a cigarette, or drink a beer and then calm down, or go talk to your pastor. There's more help out here today. There's more help out here today. But we have to understand what the cycle, what it looks like. We have to understand what the components and the underpinnings are. And it's important that we try to understand the mindset of the victim so that we don't get frustrated when we're trying to help them and feel like, they're rejecting us, or we're taking their lack of action personally, because it's not a personal thing. Victims react differently, and many of them fail to act. And that is their action, not doing anything, okay? So there are 2 major differences between your typical traumatic experience and domestic violence. Your typical traumatic experience, say a car accident or a robbery or something like that, is a one-time incident. It happened under certain circumstances. It's not very likely to continue to happen, right? When you're talking about a domestic violence situation, you're talking about a situation that involves betrayal, okay, because it involves the victim having trusted someone with their emotions, with the things that they have earned and purchased in life, whether it's their home or their car or whatever. You know, they've come into contact with their family, with their children if they have children. They know where they work. They know, you know, intimate things about them. And this person is hurting them. And this person is hurting them in an ongoing manner. And so you're looking at a serious betrayal. It's ongoing, and there appears to be no end in sight. As a matter of fact, the nature of domestic violence is that it escalates. It escalates. The amount of time it takes it to get from point A to point B may differ from relationship to relationship, but by nature, it escalates, okay? There's a point at which the abuser is no longer satisfied with just cussing you out. There's just not enough power being experienced there. So now maybe they push you a little bit, or maybe they control your cash flow a little bit. But by nature, when you're talking about domestic violence, you're talking about an escalation in the behavior that causes the trauma in the first place, okay? And so in a DV situation, an IPV situation, domestic violence or intimate partner violence, you're talking about a violation of trust and ongoing isolation. You don't have the domestic violence without isolation. Nobody outside of the relationship knows everything that's going on in that relationship. Even if the victim is sharing, the victim's probably not sharing everything. And the victim may not be sharing the worst things. May not be sharing the worst things at all, okay? So, what can happen if a person has been exposed to domestic violence is that there are triggers that are set up in them emotionally and psychologically, okay? So there are triggers that they deal with, whether they're male or female. Increased anxiety, increased fear, that fight or flight thing that we have built into us, okay, is triggered. An increased avoidance or isolation. You'll have a victim that avoids family, avoids friends, avoids social functions in an attempt to keep to a minimum, and they're hoping to eliminate the abuse that they receive on the other side of these social interactions, okay? So, yes. It happens so much. It's so prevalent. It's so prevalent. It's so prevalent that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, there's no way. You cannot stand in line at the grocery store. You cannot go to your place of worship and sit on the pew. Someone on that pew is either in a domestic violence situation right now, or they have been. Or maybe it's you. That's how prevalent it is. And you hear me reference often a report that the United Nations released in 2017. And they stated that the most dangerous place for a woman worldwide is in her own home. So this is a global problem. This is a global pandemic, it's been called. This is how serious it is. And so we can't just say, well, it's third world countries. We can't just say it's those places that are rural and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. Absolutely anyone, okay? Now, when trauma is experienced in an ongoing manner, our brain responds, okay? And this is important to know because this will help you to understand why you get the reaction or the lack of reaction that you get maybe when you're trying to assist a survivor. So when trauma is experienced in an ongoing manner, our brain responds continuously, right? As if it's under stress by preparing the body. We've heard of fight or flight. Fight, flight, or freeze. Those are 3 options when we are faced with a trauma. Are we going to fight? Are we going to run? Or do we just freeze? Because we just don't know what to do, okay? And so what happens is your body stays in this mode all the time. So even though, if I've been in an event, let's say I've been in an event in which domestic violence has occurred, some physical aggression, some name calling or whatever, it may be over. But my body doesn't recognize that it's over. And so it stays in this heightened state of awareness which has negative physical impact on your actual body. It can cause your body to break down. It can cause you to become more susceptible to illness. It can cause you not to sleep, right? Which can cause you to become unbalanced psychologically. Sleep deprivation, I'm a military veteran, and some of you are as well. Sleep deprivation, you know, is a form of torture. It's a form of torture. You don't have to, you want to torture someone, you don't have to do anything to them. Prevent them from sleeping for an extended period of time, and they will begin to break down. They will begin to break down. Psychologically, they will begin to break down, okay? And so when we stay in this heightened state of awareness, our body is on overdrive. It affects blood pressure, it affects heart rate, your ability to sleep, your appetite, your body's ability to even digest your food properly. It can cause ulcers, all kinds of things. And so we can literally start falling apart at the seams because of this overdrive mode that we stay in, because of the abuse that we have experienced back there. So once it's over, right, your body doesn't know it's over. A victim's body doesn't know it's over. And so they're walking around in this heightened state of awareness all of the time, okay? Long after it's over. Long after it's over, okay? Now, there are 3 common trauma responses. If someone can type this, I love you forever, okay? Hyperarousal is the first one. Intrusion is the second one. And constriction is the third one, okay? Hey, Misty. Hyperarousal. So we're talking about 3 common trauma responses. And we're talking about this. We're almost done for this week. But we're talking about this so that you can maybe understand the response, the reaction, or the lack of reaction that you get when you're trying to assist a victim, okay? So hyperarousal refers to the actual physiological changes that take place in the brain of trauma survivors, which prepares them, as I just said, to fight, or flee, or freeze. Okay, so being in this state results in the survivor having panic attacks, having trouble sleeping, being constantly on edge, okay, being constantly on the alert for danger, to startle easily. The slightest little thing will cause them to startle or to jump. Have difficulty sleeping, have difficulty concentrating or focusing, have difficulty maintaining a train of thought from the front to the back. It's like they'll start off thinking about one thing and end up over here thinking about something else. A hard time finishing tasks because they get started and can't finish. They get distracted easily. They have an increased ability. Now this can be a good thing, but it's an indication that something bad has happened in the past, okay? An increased ability to read the moods of others. Now, someone who has grown up in a home in which domestic violence was prevalent probably has this ability. They notice things that the average person will not notice. They are sensitive to things that other people may not attach any importance to. A change in an inflection, a change in a tone of voice, a shift in body language, a slight shift in facial expression. So they notice these things, okay? Hey, Sarah, they notice these things more acutely than your average person will. Now, that doesn't have to be a bad thing unless you live in overdrive all the time, and then that means you don't have any peace. Okay, so that's not good. That's not good. Survivors have an elevated baseline of arousal. So the sensitivity to what's going on around them is very, very, very intense. So much so that it's difficult for them to rest and to have peace and to relax and just have fun, okay? So because they're always on the lookout for danger. They're always scanning the horizon for danger. And this is not something that they have to concentrate to do. It's because the brain has been rewired and because they've been traumatized. Is this something that happens automatically? They do it automatically. Okay, and so that's what trauma will do for you. Now, I can tell you from experience that when I walk into a room, it doesn't take me any time at all. I know where the exits are. I know where the exits are. And this is not, I don't walk in saying, where are the exits? That's not what happens. It's an automatic thing for me. I know where they are. I know who's around me. All right. And even today, it's a real bad idea to come up behind me. That's not a good idea. That's not something you probably want to do. No, you probably want to announce yourself. Make sure I know you there. Okay, so that's when you go through things, when you experience trauma, there are ways that our body adapts and our brain adapts in an attempt to help us to survive, okay? Carmen. So, you startle easily, and we're talking about hyperarousal. So you're ultra sensitive. And until you can calm that down and begin to heal, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And oftentimes it's unnecessary because you're not in danger all the time. Okay? You're not in danger all the time. You're not. All right. So we talked about hyperarousal. We're still talking about the 3 common trauma responses. And now we're going to talk about intrusion or re-experiencing events. The trauma intrudes on a survivor's life even after the traumatic experience is over. So this can take the form of nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive images, and these are things that just pop up, okay? And it's the victim's not trying to think about them, not trying to remember these things at all, but they come back up. Okay, they come back up when they're sleeping, they come back up when they're in the middle of their workday or whatever. And there are things in the environment that can trigger it. Okay, and we'll talk about that as well. All right. Hello. Okay, so there's a sense of re-experiencing the traumatic event that is out of the control of the survivor. So we're not talking about a situation where the survivor says, let me go back down memory lane and think about all these things. Even if you're a believer and you want to think about, what the Lord has brought you from, that's not what we're talking about. This is not a period of time where you sit down and say, I want to remember this experience so that I can glean what I've learned from it, or I want to look back on where I've come from so that I can appreciate where I am now. When you're talking about intrusiveness, these things come up probably at the worst time. You're in the middle of something else. You're having a perfectly okay day, and then there's a flashback. You are doing fine. You are giving a talk at work. You are talking to your pastor. You're up. You're a minister of the gospel, and you're up preaching the word. Flashback. So that's what we're talking about. It's intrusive. It's not something that the survivor has any control over. It's nothing that they do that causes it to happen. It is a function really of the brain being rewired and honestly just kind of running amok. Okay, it really does. So the third thing we're going to talk about is constriction or avoidance. We've talked about hyperarousal, we've talked about intrusion, and now we're going to talk about constriction or avoidance. Now, many of you that are survivors will be able to identify with this. It's the numbing of feelings and thoughts associated with the traumatic situation. It's the numbing of feelings. So when this is occurring, the victim's not walking around feeling any emotional turmoil or pain. That's not what's happening. Hey, Jason, when this is occurring, the victim's not feeling anxious or feeling fearful or feeling angry. All right? When constriction or avoidance is occurring, the victim's not feeling anything. They don't feel anything. They feel numb. And on the one hand, that's preferable to feeling what they could be feeling, right? And that's where the avoidance comes in. So if I'm not feeling anything, then I'm not feeling that excruciating pain. I'm not feeling the embarrassment. I'm not feeling the shame. I'm not feeling devastated because my trust has been betrayed and because I'm being mistreated and I'm being battered or I'm being subjected to coercive control, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. Now, the problem with not feeling anything is that when things get really, really bad, do you even know that that's happening? Are you so numb to it that you cannot tell? Right? Think about a hot stove. Put your hand on a hot stove. A perfectly healthy, normal person will say, that's hot, and snatch their hand back. But if you don't feel anything, you just leave it there. And leave it there. And leave it there. And it gets worse. And the damage is worse. Right? The damage to the skin is worse. The nerve damage can occur if you leave it there too long. And so when you think about the numbing that occurs with a trauma victim, this is why it is so critical, because it prevents a victim from ascertaining just how dangerous their situation is. Okay. All right? You can't, if you don't feel anything, if you're not responding to anything, then you don't know how bad it is. And that really can cause a person to stay in a situation longer than they need to stay in a situation, okay? So, in constriction, the survivor avoids all circumstances associated with the trauma and may withdraw from others in an attempt to find emotional safety. So, part of the isolation that occurs when we're talking about domestic violence is because the abuser initiates the isolation. The abuser has set the stage for the isolation, has threatened the family, has threatened friends, have threatened, the job, has threatened public exposure or whatever if the victim doesn't comply. So sometimes a victim will isolate in an attempt, it's a misguided attempt on one hand, to protect those that they care about, to keep them out of the line of fire, right? And then part of it is embarrassment. But a lot of times it's because they know that the abuser is capable of bringing harm to anyone who gets close to the victim, okay? So that's part of it. The other thing is, it takes a whole lot of energy to continually explain to your family and friends what's going on with you. Why are you depressed? Why are you not returning phone calls? Why are you losing so much weight? Why are you gaining so much weight? Why do you have a black eye? What is that bruise on your arm? What do you mean you fell down again? What do you mean you don't have any money? You make more money than I do. Where's all your money going? So it's easier to isolate than to continue to explain the inexplicable. Okay? So on the one hand, they're trying to protect the people that they care about. On the other hand, it's exhausting to explain something that there is no reasonable explanation for. Okay? So, in review, we said that the 3 prominent trauma responses are hyperarousal, intrusion, and avoidance or constriction. Okay, so just wanted you to be aware of that so that when you're dealing with a survivor that you don't take it personal. It'd be real easy to say, well, we've been friends since we were 5 years old, and we've been friends since high school, or, we went to college together, and, you can tell me anything, but, you're not telling me the truth, you're not sharing, you're not sharing things with me, you're not telling the truth, and it'd be real easy to take that personally and to get offended and unwittingly play into the hands of the abuser by getting angry and isolating him, to withdrawing and pulling back. So if you can understand that, if someone close to you is behaving strangely or differently, something's probably going on. And it may be that they're trying to even protect you by not telling you, okay? It could be that they're embarrassed, and it could be that they're really afraid for your safety. That if you do know, and it could be in some cases, and some of y'all, I know this is the case, in some cases, if they told you, there would absolutely be a problem. There'd be a problem. There'd be a problem. And they might be concerned about what you may do if they tell you. So I just want you to be sensitive to that when you are interacting with someone who is in a situation in which domestic violence or intimate partner violence may be occurring. Understand that they may not tell you the truth. They may deny it. They may get angry with you in an attempt to push you away to keep you from figuring out what's going on. They may be trying to protect you. They may have been told that if the secret is let out, that people are going to get hurt. Okay? And there have been so many instances, even lately, where men have killed their entire families. And invariably, someone in their family says, I can't believe he did this. I never thought he would do it. This is despite the fact that they've said it. So what I want you to know today is this. If someone ever says, I'll kill you, ever, I don't care how upset they are, I don't care how inebriated they are, I don't care. The Bible says out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. If it came out of the mouth, it was in the heart. Okay? It couldn't come out the mouth if it wasn't in the heart first. So it was in there. Now, they may hate they said it, but if they said it, don't you dismiss that. Don't dismiss that. If they apologize, that's part of the cycle. Okay? So there's a family, this occurred, I believe, in New Jersey, where, and this is just over the past couple of days, where this man murdered his wife, killed his children, and then went to a park and hung himself. Now, this man had told his wife that he would kill her. She said to his cousin, he said he would kill me. I guess the cousin asked him about it and he denied it. And he said, oh, I would never kill you. I would never hurt you. I love you. Okay, so now the whole family's dead. If they say it, don't you dismiss it. I don't care how many flowers. I don't care if they show up with the Hope Diamond. They said that they're going to hurt you. Understand that the potential for that action, the groundwork has already been laid if they've said it, okay? Understand that men can be victims as well. It's difficult for a man to acknowledge it because they have far much less support than women do today. They may face outright ridicule. They may not be believed. In the case of, here's two famous people, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, his wife, his ex-wife. I think they got married back in 2015. They were in a movie. They were co-stars in a movie together. They got married in 2015. The wheels came off that bus relatively quickly. They were divorced, I think, they filed for divorce 18 months later. But they have alleged domestic violence against one another. Serious domestic violence. Like off-the-chain domestic violence against one another. All right? And so one of the things that we've talked about in the past is how you can have two parties in a relationship who are abusers. And then you have to try to determine who the core aggressor is. Who initiated it. All right? And so what I want you all to understand is this. If you find yourself in a situation, I don't care what the situation is, and what it pulls out of you is something that's ugly to you. What it pulls out of you is language or behavior or a thought process that undermines who you are at the core of who you are. If they're bringing out the worst in you, all right, as opposed to the best in you, you are looking at a situation that could turn into a domestic violence situation relatively quickly. Relatively quickly, okay? And for those of you who don't want to ever say anything negative about anybody else, okay, you don't have to say anything negative about them. Just, we are not good together. We're not good for each other, okay? That's all the reason you need. That's all the reason you need, okay? So today we've been talking about domestic violence from the perspective of a survivor. And again, if this is what our focus is going to be for the remainder of this month, we've got two more Sundays. If you or someone you know is a survivor and you feel ready to share your story, reach out, let me know, and we can secure a date and we can have a discussion here on this broadcast that may be beneficial to others and can help you to move forward in your own healing. You know, a large part of healing, I think, is finding a purpose, something positive that you can pull out of what you've experienced. It doesn't mean that what you've experienced is good or even that what you experienced was destined or anything like that. But it means that you can learn something from it so that it was not just pain that you've experienced for no apparent reason, that it can benefit someone else, okay? Now, I just want to say one more thing. I've seen a lot lately on social media where people say, the first time he or she hits you, get out. Listen to me. Listen to me. It's rare that the very first thing that they're going to do is hit you. That's incredibly rare. That's rare. You need to get out when they cut you out. You need to get out when you get indicators that what you feel and what you need is unimportant. You don't need to hang around to get hit, because it's almost too late. Now you're dancing around on the edge of disaster, because they are committed to controlling the victim at that point, okay? You don't wait to get hit to get out. And a lot of times a mother will tell her child, the first time he hit you, leave. No. Something happened before he hit you. Something's happened before he hit you. And it probably happened more than once, okay? There were other indicators that this was not the relationship for you. What were they? Do not wait to get hit to get out. Don't do that. And this is why so many don't get out with their life. This is why. Okay, so I have to say that. It sounds great, and maybe it looks great on a t-shirt. The first time he or she hits you, get out. You should have been gone by the time they hit you. Should have been gone. You missed something by the time they hit you. Okay? All right. I needed to say that. I needed to say that because sometimes we hear these things and it sounds great. It's got a nice ring to it, but it's not good advice. It's not good advice. Do not wait to get hit to get out. If they say, if you do blah, 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 I'm going to slap you. That's your clue. And you probably had a couple of clues before that you dismissed and overlooked. Okay? So don't wait to get hit. Don't wait to get hit. Don't do that. That is incredibly dangerous. And you may not get out. All right? This is Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. Love you to pieces. We will be back on next week. We're going to finish out this series this month, looking at domestic violence from the perspective of a survivor. We think it's helpful for those who want to help survivors to understand the pushback that they may get when they try to help, okay? The isolation, the anger, the irritation, all of that, and how you can best help. The most important thing is don't take it personally. Do not take it personally, and understand that a survivor ultimately is responsible for making a decision to leave, to stay. Oh, you can know all day long what they ought to do. They've got to be able to walk it out, okay? But you don't want to be in a position where you've not tried to help them, all right? This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson. I'll be back on next week. And until then, know that I'm praying for you. We're going to continue to move forward and continue to raise awareness regarding domestic violence. If you subscribe to our blog at www.judasroar.com, you will automatically receive a template for a safety plan. And this is something that everyone should have, because even if you're not in a situation yourself, someone around you is, or someone around you will be, and you'll be able to give them a template that can help them to plan how they can exit a very dangerous situation being as safe as possible. All right? This is Cheryl Richardson, and I'll talk to you again next week. Blessings to you.